Hello everyone, and welcome to this quick guide on the best glyph for Sorcerer, specifically for this very first slot on the Sorcerer Paragon board that we all have access to very early. This will be the best choice for almost any build or playstyle from a mathematical perspective, which I will explain in detail, so you don't have to trust me or anyone else on what's the best. You'll simply know it's the best choice because of the numbers. As a mechanical engineer, this is the way I naturally approach games and the type of content I like to focus on, basically optimizing complex systems for certain builds or playstyles. And this is just really where I get my kicks in games, and I found that I really enjoy sharing this kind of stuff as well. So any builds or guides that you find on my channel will follow this same philosophy. Alright, so getting into it, the best glyph for this first slot is going to be the one that gives you the highest damage scaling. If you're ever playing a wizard or a mage or a sorcerer in any game and you're given the choice between scaling your magic damage and doing anything else, you're going to want to choose damage and then more damage. That's because this archetype thrives on deleting stuff before it can touch you. The more damage you do, the faster stuff gets destroyed and the less likely it is to ever threaten you. And this is especially true in Diablo 4 with the way non-physical damage scales, which we will touch on shortly. So as a sorcerer or sorceress, your best defense is a strong offense. We're all glass cannons at heart, that's why we're playing this class, so this setup is going to give you the most cannon for your glass. The other thing that's really important to understand for glyphs is their power is dependent on what surrounds the socket they're placed in. Because each glyph scales off of certain stats or buffs certain nodes, where you place the glyph on the Paragon board will have a huge impact on how powerful it is. So with these ideas in mind, let's take a look at the best choice for this very first slot on the Sorcerer Paragon board, which is the Enchanter glyph. With the correct nodes at level 15, this glyph is going to give you a 70.2% increase to all magical damage you deal. This non-physical damage stat, which is essentially magic or elemental damage, applies to every school of magic and every skill, making it an extremely strong glyph that will work and scale well with any build. This will make it so you can confidently build your first gate without worrying about respeccing if you want to change builds, and will give you an easy choice for your first glyph to pump XP into as you start to clear Nightmare tier dungeons. Another reason why non-physical damage stacking is so strong in Diablo 4 is because of the way the stats from the Paragon board interact with the stats on items. As you can see, this 20% cold stat increase on my crazy gloves that I got last night actually gives me a 60% effective cold stat increase in my stat window. This is because items count as base stats and the modifiers on the Paragon board enhance those base stats. So since I have a 230% increase to non-physical damage just for my Paragon board, this 20% cold damage stat is going to get a 230% boost, which when you unpack the math, ends up being about a 64% increase for my gloves, about a 30% increase for my chest, and about a 35% increase for my ring. So if you add all this up, we should be getting exactly 129.1% effective cold damage increase from the 39.1% base cold damage increase on our items. And if you look at the numbers, that is exactly what's happening here. So not only does building non-physical damage on the Paragon board help you scale your damage directly, it also helps scale the damage benefit you get from items. And if you're interested in getting crazy elemental damage scaling for your build, like over 300% by mid-60s, be sure to check out my next video where I will be covering what I think is the best first Paragon board choice for Sorcerer that follows this same line of thought of increasing your elemental damage. The other reason this glyph is such a good choice is because of the way it scales based on the nodes around it. If you look at the different glyphs available for Sorcerer, there are basically two types. One buffs certain types of nodes around it, while the other scales off the number of attribute nodes required. The problem with the glyphs that buff certain nodes by a percentage is that the base value of those nodes will never increase. If you're buffing this 20% damage node by 15%, that's only a 3% increase for the rare node and a 0.8% increase for the magic node, for a total of 3.8% increase. At equal level, that's about the same as what a single intellect node gives us with the Enchanter glyph. If you level this elementalist glyph, the percentage you are buffing it may increase to 40 or 50%, but the base damage buff on the node will always be 20%. The other type of glyph, which scales based on the number of stat nodes acquired around it, will almost always scale better because as you level the glyph, not only will the percentage you are buffing it increase, but also the base value of the stat will increase as you acquire all of the nodes around it, and then will jump again when you get a range increase if it's placed in an appropriate socket. It's also important to not overvalue these additional modifiers as they do not scale as you level the glyph, at least so far. So while you may be tempted to try one of these other glyphs specific to your build with a cool additional modifier, realize that an extra 5 or 10 or even 15% damage boost under certain circumstances will always be worse than a flat 70% increase to all damage all the time, which will continue to scale up to even more damage with every glyph level acquired beyond 15. Don't worry though, these types of glyphs will be great for your second or third glyph slot and will be much more powerful because you already have this massive 70% damage stack underneath them. Finally, when looking to slot a glyph, it's important to understand what nodes are available within its first and second range, as these will directly impact the effectiveness of the glyph. If you take a look at this first glyph slot for Sorcerer and add up all the available attributes, there is much more intellect within range than any other stat. On top of this, intellect is the highest priority base attribute for sorcerers as it directly scales skill damage. So not only is each intellect node you grab buffing this glyph by another % of magic damage, it's also giving you an extra 0.5% skill damage, since 10 intellect equals 1% skill damage increase, as well as a bit of extra resistance. And of the glyphs that scale off intellect available right now to Sorcerer, this clearly seems to be the best choice for this slot for pretty much any build. Alrighty, that is it for this one. I hope you found it useful. If you did, be sure to check out my next video, which is going to follow this same thought train on what the best first Paragon board selection is for Sorcerer, which, once completed, should pop up on the screen right now. And I'm planning to do more in-depth analysis like this in the future, as well as some full build guides as I progress into endgame. So take care, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.
Time for our roads to part.